So this is the Open Table Forum. So I'm going to go over a set of rules here that have been given to me, and I'm going to give you a few encouragements, and then we're going to have 3 provocations from on the 3 themes of the conference to get us started. But after that, it's to you to join in. So the first rule is that this is a performance in the form of a dinner table conversation. Anyone seated at the table is a guest performer. Anything is on the menu. Talk is the only course. No hostess will assist you. It is a democracy. And to participate, you simply take an empty seat at the table. If the table is full, you can request a seat. If you leave the table, you can come back again and again. Feel free, like my children do, to write on the tablecloth. There can be silence. There might be awkwardness. There could be laughter. There is an end, but no conclusion. So you have those memorized. And but essentially what it is our provocateurs will start the conversation with 3 provocations, and you are invited to sit with them at the table and continue the conversations. We'll have 3 microphones, so it's just like dinner, but with microphones. But I'd like to encourage you really here. We need you. This is your opportunity to take control of the conversation. You have to have courage. You have to be free to disagree. You can join at a moment that matters to you. And my job simply will be to end it when the time is up. And I think that's the rules. Any questions on format? When you have something to say, you go sit down. But we'll start with 3 provocations. I'll ask my provocateurs to take their place. We have Iris Namani. And I've asked, instead of going through their bios, we are just going to do a quick fact about them. Iris is an Israeli mother of 3. So there we go. Luc Courchaine, who confessed to me that he had more than his fair share of oysters at lunch today. And Alan Grey Eyes, who knows almost all the words to the music of Moana, especially the part played by The Rock. So without further ado, I'm going to, in the order that I introduced them, ask them to provoke us.
Hi, everyone. So I thought I would share a letter that we received from a patron recently at the end of our World Stage Festival that just happened in April. And I welcome some insight or thoughts. Hello. As a past subscriber to the World Stage series and a current subscriber to a good deal of other local theatre, I was interested to see a brochure for the current Harbourfront season recently while dining, and I picked it up to see if perhaps I might want to resume. The season does look indeed does look interesting, but near the end, my attention was drawn to your new policy of relaxed performance. I looked this up and then spoke to someone at the box office to confirm your meaning. As someone with a disability myself, I appreciate every effort venues make to remove barriers and facilitate enjoyment by everyone. But I would never expect that to be to the detriment of the larger audience or the disruption of the performance itself. To make explicit accommodation for a few who have not enough interest or capacity to remain in respectful and appreciative silence throughout a performance seems to me a cowardly surrender to political correctness and a grave disservice to the arts which you purport to honor. A sensitive alternative might be to hold a few special performances similar to the performances for children, which the symphony holds, where the entire audience has the same needs and expectations. In the meantime, for the sake of your audiences, I sincerely hope that in practice the need for this has actually proven to be very, very small indeed, and instances of disturbance have been rare. I, however, will not test the theory and will continue to spend my money elsewhere where the concept of serious theater, as opposed to incidental entertainment, remains intact.
Yeah, I would bar this person from the theater forever, and perhaps, no, not the rest of his family, but who knows. No, I want to start on something else. My daughter gave birth to a young boy about 4.5 years ago, and I was very happy to become a grandfather, but I was wondering, why would somebody come in the world at this time in history? And I was in Toronto at the time, walking down the street, and I found the answer. I had the answer. So why is it coming to the world? I think that, I'm trying to connect together what we said about technology, starting with Robert Lepage yesterday, the issues that were raised today with territory. That's another big part of the challenges we have as a society, as a species. And then the art, the function of art, the role of art. And for me, the reason why somebody would be welcome in the world today is because we're going through a very deep redefinition of the idea of space and territory. This is what we're facing now. We look at all the technology that brings us beyond the walls of this room. Like while we're here, you can receive a message, you can be in conversation with somebody else, you could put head-mounted display, and then suddenly you're teleported into another world. So what is happening right now is that the space that we're in is expanding. It is becoming more complex because it's layering. It has layers of physical space, layers of virtual spaces, layers of meaning, layers of history that we were referred to this morning. So this expansion of space is a good news, in fact. I pay homage to the architect who built this, Dimitri Dimakopoulos, 50 years ago. It's a space that we still enjoy today. It's comfortable. So I think this expansion of space is opening a whole new territory that has to be conceptualized, constructed, inhabited. And this territory is very similar in a way to the one that is physical, built of atoms. This other territory is built of bits. So there is, I think, I don't know, we always like to think that the moment that we're alive is an important moment in history, but I think ours is because of the computers. When the computers came, they opened up new spaces that we're discovering them every day. So we have to master these spaces, inhabit them, and construct them. And this is why there's a lot of work for the people that are born today and will be born in the future. But these spaces, I think, hold their challenge. They have to be welcoming to us. They have to be able to support our migrations. This discussion about the relationship between the last wave this big wave of migration when the Europeans came in North America, discussing with my friend who makes the capteurs de rêve. He was saying that in the North American Indian theory, the first settlers came 100,000 years ago from Asia by boats, and another wave came from the north in the Beijing Strait. So there are waves of movement, and this creates a territory. But we need to occupy this territory. We need to make it inhabitable. So the challenge with these new territories that are opening up now have to be made inhabitable, so that we can exist in these spaces. So this is why I think it's interesting to be born today. And our role, to follow on the last presentation, is to make sure that we have the leaders that will have enough vision to create the context in which we will be able to survive as a species and do what we're supposed to do, on the planet.
Hello? So I grew up going to the Winnipeg Folk Festival, and I don't know if Trudy was the leader of it back when I was younger, but I was raised by a single mom, and so she was always able to get us into kids got in for free. And it played a big role in my desire to get involved in the arts and work on the business side of the music industry, seeing the artists on stage and the power of presentation and the effect that the arts can have on everyday people had a big impact on me. And so I've maintained connection with the Winnipeg Folk Festival for a long time, and I'm on the Indigenous Advisory Committee now. And a couple of years ago, we always have groups of elders and community organizations come through and participate as kind of their introduction or their gateway into the festival experience. And one of the elders and I hate to speak on their behalf, but I get what I paraphrase is her impression of the event was that music festivals are some of the last strongholds of white privilege, and that's kind of stuck with me since then.
Now, come and sit down at the table, talk to the person across from you, just as if we're having a late night.
They take somebody's place?
No, there's 10 places. We can now have 10 people.
Oh, boy. Okay, did you hear? Oh, there it is. Your letter. Okay, I don't know whether I'm supposed to argue with you, but I just want to tell you a story that perhaps will address this letter. I'm with Theatre Triffic. We're an all-inclusive theatre company, so we work with actors of all abilities. We just finished a performance in a very small space that seats a maximum of 40. One of the actors, he wasn't in this performance, but he took tickets at the door. He has cerebral palsy, he's in a chair, he speaks through a voice board. And then he gets to watch the performance because he's taking tickets. And when emotional scenes come up in the performance, he just gets so excited, he starts to bang his feet and on his chair and that. And I know this, and when we sat him, we always make sure that he's got, first of all, he has a mechanical chair, so he needs a lot of room. And there was a couple beside him, and I was sitting, as the director, I'm sort of sitting in the back and watching and hoping that this, because I know that Tyson responds emotionally very strongly. Afterwards, I asked the couple that were sitting there, I said, "What were you, and I meant it, did you enjoy the performance?" I didn't ask anything, but did you enjoy this? They said, "No, it was awesome." And we got excited when that fellow next to us got excited. So I thought, oh, that was sharing. It's so sad that whoever wrote this letter to you doesn't realize, and again, I use that wonderful phrase, walking with. This couple walked with and shared. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you for sharing that with us, with me. It's, we in fact didn't receive very few patron letters, so this was an interesting one for us to receive, and we are working on what that response is, and I welcome any other thoughts, ideas about relaxed. I don't know how many people do relaxed performances. This is what we've started doing over the past couple of years, and an important part of the work that we're doing in all of our disciplines and all the work that we're doing across at Harbourfront Centre. So, anyone else have any other?
Somebody else want to?
It is. It is. I just
Wow.
didn't feel like I could share their name. But
Right.
yes, it is. Yes. No, this one is signed.
I would love to talk to you about relaxed performances, but I actually want to talk about the folk festival.
Great.
But I have a story to share later. So my heart kind of breaks when I hear that story, because I think about the efforts that the folk festival has made to try and be inclusive. In the Winnipeg context, it feels like they're doing really important and interesting work. Sort of removing accessibility barriers in terms, for anybody who doesn't know, the Winnipeg Folk Festival takes place in an extraordinary provincial park. Everything's a 15-minute drive from Winnipeg, so maybe it's a 20-minute drive, but there's a bus to get out there, so the sort of historical barriers around transportation have been removed. Children attend for free, which is something that sort of disappeared for a little while, but it's back now. It's made a much more it feels like a really family-friendly event. Buffy St. Marie played. I just feel like they're an organization that's really walking the walk and talking the talk, but in a way that I see Indigenous volunteers there. And it just sort of breaks my heart to think that it's still seen as it's still seen as a closed shop, right? That it's something that you look around and see privilege.
I'd like to respond to that. See, I think we've had, from the First Nations perspective, there's been hundreds and hundreds of years of genocide. From a person of color's perspective, there's been generations and generations of racism and oppression. So delivering an apology is going to take some time to settle that. There are success stories, but there are more historical years and years of oppression. So I think these success stories are great, but that does not mean that our opinion of looking at certain large institutions as internalized, systemic, racist issues is going to change just like that, just because there were some success stories. So I do think that it's the effect of this genocide for hundreds and hundreds of years is that our opinion is going to stay like that when we see transformation for a considerable amount of time at a quantity and a quality and a volume which we yet don't see in society. So I think it's going to take a long time before that view will change, and I think we have that right to have that view. In terms of your story, I would like to share something similar, because was it correct that the patrons said that they were themselves disabled?
Yes.
So in a lot of festivals that are just, I'm going to put you on spot, Ronalta, because we were having a conversation about this, but I, as a culturally diverse leader who tries to find space for South Asian artists in South Asian communities, I often find, who am I fighting for? Like with the major institutions who I think are not representing South Asians, I'm fighting for my South Asian voice. And then I have my own peers within the South Asian community who have no idea what I'm fighting for, because they have internalized themselves in functioning in this environment so much that they don't even know what they need to fight for, because it's a survival mechanism to be in that. So it's kind of a lost cause for leaders like me on both sides in that kind of mentality. And I wondered whether, rather than just I was kind of thinking like, where is this person coming from if they were themselves that? And I wonder whether there's some of that going on. But some of the biggest changes in the world have happened with small groups of people. So I think by catering to smaller groups of people and having relaxed performances, I think we are embracing change. So that's good.
I think this might pick up on what you're saying. For me, a lot changed in terms of the role of art and culture when I had children. And so to your provocation, and also to yours actually, I'm married to a Newfoundlander, and I'm 3.5 generations Canadian, but by blood, I'm pure Chinese. And we would always talk when they were first born, they're really beautiful kids, but you know, what are they? And people would always go, oh, they look so much like their mother. And how racialized that was, because actually when I look at my daughter particularly, she looks a lot like my husband in her features, though the planes of her face are like mine. And race becomes a really, for this next generation, on an optimistic term, it's a whole new frontier, and we're not, I know more people of my generation who have kids of mixed race, and I know there's a whole history of Canadians who have that in their history already. And but the kids nowadays are being educated in more tolerant ways with regards to LGBTQ, with regards to race, and they become racialized because of us. So it's a responsibility for us to educate ourselves and be open and learn from them and their openness about what these things mean. And part of that is through culture. And one of the things also when I had my kids was realizing that I worked for a theater that didn't allow babes in arms. And we've started to do relaxed performances in terms of accessibility programs. We've also started to do accessibility work backstage of how do we get deaf and disabled artists in our theaters, and realizing our backstage spaces accessible. And one of the things with the accessible performances that's been wonderful is, you know, my kids want to go see Henry and the Fifths, you know, and I can take them there. And I feel more comfortable taking them there in an accessible performance. I hate that I feel more comfortable taking them there in an accessible performance. But then when we talk among the organization, we can also say, in Shakespeare's days, people sat in the pit and threw food at each other and argued and heckled. And that's, you know, if we say we're grounded in Shakespeare, well, that's Shakespeare too. So in terms of looking historically back and historically forward, the accessibility performances for us, I think, are a way of challenging our contemporary culture of what is theater. And to Jenny's point, theater is now. And so if we want our theater now to be able to enjoy and be social in a room together, then that's a choice you stand behind, and that's leadership. So I'm sorry you feel this way to your patron, but this is why we're doing this program. And I'm glad that you have the opportunity to go to a non-accessible performance delineated as such, if that's where you feel more comfortable. But this is why we're doing ours this way.
I will just say that we did a relaxed performance last year for the Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, and we integrated it within our subscription audience. And we informed our subscribers that, so we didn't do a special performance, we just announced to our subscribers in advance and that we were going to make this relaxed performance. We explained what that meant. And we got a beautiful lot of meaningful letters afterwards, but one of them was from a subscriber who said that she has a bladder disorder, and it was the first time that she didn't feel guilty getting up and down during the show. She said, an hour is actually too long for me. So it was an accessibility piece that we hadn't thought about, right? That if you have a hard time sitting for an hour, it's sometimes really lovely to be in an environment where you feel okay to get away. So.
Maybe I'll try to connect this notion of like exclusion or tolerance towards one another, this notion of the big legacy, bad legacy of I don't know, the Spanish, destroying cultures in South America and everything, with this opportunities offered by these expanding, or at least what I perceive as expanding. There are new spaces that are being constructed now by young artists, or like social media, for example, is a society-driven territory in a way, and we can blame it as being like reflecting people's opinion. People tend to hang around those who think like them, and this is why we have distortions like the Trump election, for example. But in fact, it's kind of, if it's managed well, these opportunities to create territories where we recognize one another, we can care for one another, but we can also welcome others. And that's the thing, that's what's missing in social media today. It's not welcoming to others. You have to invite others, you can be... Anyway, so this is what we have to engineer so that we can create the conditions where all these old bad assets as a people can be sort of left behind. So that's why I'm kind of optimistic. I don't think technology will solve all these problems, but I think with time, if you given the opportunity to create a more open kind of accessible territory, then these things will solve themselves, if you believe in the human ability to do that.
Hi, sorry I'm late to dinner. My apologies. Welcome. I think it's interesting, the parallel that's now being drawn about spaces, because for people in my generation, they're kind of interchangeable, online spaces and physical spaces. And I've been in physical spaces where a relaxed performance really wouldn't really even, you wouldn't realize that it's happening, because the space is set up in such a way that you don't really hear your fellow audience members that much. Things are amplified, so and people are moving around freely. And then there are more traditional spaces where you are meant to sit and be quiet, and that is. I don't know what the solution is to that, but I think what that patron is getting at is, well, in the space that I'm accustomed to, that's what I want to be able to enjoy this art, and I can. And that's where I think some of all the technologies that we were talking, especially on Saturday, come into play, because it can be really exciting for someone, let's say with a bladder disorder, someone who just can't really leave the house, or to participate in completely new ways, and that's super exciting to me.
Yeah, I was thinking similarly that the conversation about the letter and about music festivals as being the last bastion of white privilege, is that? Stronghold of white privilege. I mean, there's a common conversation there, building off what you just said, around participation and around how the levels of participation and the expectations of an audience have been prescribed, and they've been prescribed by people who are not those people. But I've got to go to another dinner, so I'm going to...
So I just wanted to pick up on a bit of my topic too. And my first introduction to the idea that Indigenous people could be individuals was through Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me, in which he talks about his African American experience. And yeah, so I just wanted to drive home the point that this person that made the comments, like, she could be going through a bad day and just have a bad experience. And so it shouldn't reflect the perspective of all Indigenous people. We're all individuals. We have different perspectives, and we're diverse, just as diverse as everyone else here in the room. But I also wanted to just say that I just simply programming a couple Indigenous acts isn't enough to create the kind of change that we're looking for. And I think it really does come from what we've heard today, and including Indigenous people on the business side, Indigenous people on the programming side, Indigenous people in the boards. And a great example is my former coworker, Ruben, just took on the programming duties for the MTS Center and True North, which is like the owners of our hockey team in Winnipeg. And so he's been programming more Indigenous artists to open for like the big bands that are coming through, because he's my buddy now, or he's always been my buddy. So it's really great to have that kind of influence and those relationships that are opening doors for our artists, and then expanding their audiences, and hopefully our Indigenous folks will take more interest in the arts because they see themselves in the acts being presented on stage, and I think that's super powerful.
I was just going to respond that it's true also, thinking about, we offer relaxed performances amongst a number of performances. We work closely with artists, trying to encourage, working with the artists. Not every show, not every artist was ready to, was a performance that they felt that the art could speak to, that kind of a performance, to do that. But that that it also needs to be, it's the artists on the stage that also, like, this is not just about building awareness and understanding and changing the perspective of what it is to experience a performance in a traditional setting, or moving to more changing the idea of what is a traditional theatrical experience. I think that's sort of starting to shift. But it's also about the art on the stages, and it's about the people behind the stage, right? Like the putting on that work. And I think this is just, yes, it's one person's perspective, and I think over time, as more of this kind of work starts happening, to your point, right? Like it's a lot about time, right? Time, and that we need, as long as we have conviction in the kind of path that we should be going on, walking side by side, that we can hopefully start changing, yeah?
Hello. I just wanted to say that when you, we're talking about walking side by side in performance, again, our company has a small choir group that is, again, of mixed ability, and we do have some Indigenous participants. And what was so exciting for us is at the last, I can't remember it. You know, the National Aboriginal Day?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. We had, she is Ojibwe, and she grew up learning to sing O Canada in a different kind of version. So she taught that to us, and then she said, I'm going to teach it to you in Ojibwe too, call and response. And we said, well, is that okay if we do that? You know, and she said, it's okay. So she did that to us, and then we were invited to sing as the opening act at the National Aboriginal Day, and it was such a thrill because they had to lift our wheelchair. You know, we have some wheelchair. They had to, and they invited us. So it would be lovely to have it the other way around. But it was an honor to be invited.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, and I just want to encourage you all to seek out love. And I think that's what we're not doing enough of it in our communities, and especially in the Native community. Like, you might find people that are having bad days and are mean, or that's just their personality. Maybe they've survived a lot of trauma and they're just not at that place where they can be loving. But I think you just need to keep on taking chances, and eventually you'll find somebody that's loving and it's gonna give you the opportunity. And yeah, seek out love.
I'm nervous. It's been a long time since I've been invited anywhere, let alone a nice dinner like this one. I want to touch on a couple things that have come up And actually, specifically, I've been waiting this whole weekend to talk about language. I find it really interesting that we've spent so much of this weekend introducing ourselves bilingually or acknowledging the room in French and in English, knowing that we're on Mi'kmaq territory. And also, many of us in the room likely would, as visitors to a new place, learn how to say hello and thank you in Spanish or German or whatever. I can think of how to say hello in over 10 languages just because of the countries I've visited. I believe in Mi'kmaq, hello is kwe kwe. And I'm a visitor to this territory, I'm not Mi'kmaq, and I think there's some confusion around permission, perhaps, and where's the line of respect? I don't think it's ever wrong to say hello in another language. I don't think anyone would ever, take offense to that. And I think when we talk about the calls to action, there's a really simple way to begin your action, which is to examine your language. Words like tolerance even. To me, sometimes the word tolerance bothers me because I don't want to be tolerated. I want to be welcomed. I've read this plaque like 40 times that says, working with vision resulted in the union of provinces and a great nation. This plaque falsely erases the unity that was this land, that was Turtle Island before colonial borders were imposed. And that land was organized in a sophisticated way through language and trade routes and migration and song routes. And it was governed. And so I invite everyone in the room to consider the way we talk about these issues, the way we talk about inclusivity and indigeneity, and especially when we're approaching the 150th anniversary, like the question that always comes up for me is like 150th birthday for who? So that's what I wanted to say at dinner. Thanks.
Thanks for bringing language back, because I asked a question yesterday. I did not like the answer, and I couldn't sleep actually on it, so I'm going to bring it back. And I'm actually going to attempt to provoke the room. So we were talking about Culture Track yesterday, and I want to remind us that this conference is called Culture Next. And I believe the Business for the Arts spent a bunch of effort to raise money towards this research that we're going to adopt from from America, to apply towards generating some statistics in Canada. I'm all for that. I definitely resonate with the sentiment around doing research. But I think we as a nation need to understand bilingualism is not multiculturalism. And the fact that we are choosing to do a statistical-based nationwide research, investing thousands of dollars, and have questionnaires in only 2 languages, I think directly contradicts the intention of creating culture in our country. And a lot of people came and told me this in person, so I'm like, what was the responsibility of the room when somebody says that Statistics Canada says 94% speak English? Yeah, but they speak English out of necessity. Like a person, like someone like me who comes into this country, does not need to speak English. I speak 3 other languages that I don't have an opportunity to talk as a status quo. So yes, I learned certain languages to be able to communicate the way I'm communicating right now. So that statistic is BS, to give me reasons to not have a questionnaire in languages that are now even being acknowledged in the parliament.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Pass the potatoes. I totally agree. Culture is not something that you do, that you learn an extra language to do. It's something that you experience in the place that is the most comfortable to you and the closest to your heart. And so people who are, coming to Canada and going to work and working in English and working in French are going home where they're back to where they're comfortable, and into their communities where they're comfortable, and that's where they are dialoguing with culture. So I absolutely agree, and I think it's extremely important that that question be revisited.
I'm a couple of glasses in now. We've been here for a while, so I'm just going to say kind of some stuff that I wouldn't But I'd just like to observe that the composition of this fantastic dinner party is made up of people wearing red badges and our invited guests, and that the yellow badges are sitting on the outside watching. And I hope that's a good thing, and that my colleagues are listening closely. But I also, you know, because I'm so drunk, I could say this. I hope as well that you can listen to this, take the information, but also jump into the conversations like this when you get back home. I feel so fortunate to have had the experience that I've had in my life. I've just had the rocket ship to privilege. And, but the biggest question now is, what the fuck to do with it? And I just, I know that in intimate conversations, we're all of us feeling this. I just would encourage you to get on this table and get in on the conversation more actively. So thank you, Red Badges, for taking over the dinner, but I commend the rest of you to get in here. Also, the wine is really good.
Well, Gideon's, I'm just going to wait for this to work. So I work at the Canada Council, but since we're all here as friends, and I've also had a few glasses, so I feel more, because I'm a very shy person, I'm an introvert, so I admire all these extroverts who feel comfortable jumping in, but I wanted to speak to you, Rohit, about your question about language and how it's the idea of questionnaires and surveys is all about how organizations can find out what people think, and an organization like the Canada Council deeply cares about what our communities think. And I also, there's a couple of people who talked about the fact that, you know, the people here have a lot of power, we have a lot of authority. So, and I do, in my job, I oversee all of our research, and that includes all of our questionnaires and opinions and public surveys. And so what I did yesterday, after your question, was wrote to our director of research, and I said, in all of our questionnaires that we will do going forward, can we put a note of invitation to say if any person who wishes to contribute to this questionnaire in a language other than English and French, please contact the Canada Council and we'll make that happen. So, my point is that when there are things that come up like this, I think we have a responsibility to assess, see what we can do, and sometimes there's small actions, and I can guarantee it won't be hundreds of thousands of people who contact the Canada Council. It will be maybe a couple, 50, 20, 100, whatever it is. I think we as institutions have responsibilities, and I thank you personally for raising the question and insisting on it, and yeah, I thought I would.
Just to close that on my end, I've had numerous conversations around language with the Canada Council. Last year, I and Ravi Jain teamed up with a bunch of organizations to do 12th Night in Hindi. I did it in Vancouver, and it kind of silenced all the people who were saying South Asians don't like to go to theater in Vancouver, because I was like, okay, put us South Asians on theater and do it in the language that we like. You just shut everybody up. So, but in terms of the Canada Council, I think my point was, I think you guys have already done some measures, like you are now acknowledging First Nations languages in the program that has been catered towards First Nations. That's a great, huge step forward. I would personally like to see that extended to other languages as well. And I obviously now, where do we draw the line and how many languages can we acknowledge? But I think we've made a huge step forward personally in that way. But I think we can also start doing that on our stages. And I personally don't think, like the really interesting part of doing 12th Night in Hindi with subtitles on stage was, there were, this piece had actual segments of the production which actually weren't subtitled. And I had so many people from the audiences who did not speak Hindi, who came to me and said they still enjoyed it. And so I think we need to start taking artistic risks in that way, even in language. And when I say language, I'm not just talking spoken language, I also mean sign language. Yeah.
I just have to say something to that.
Agreed to that too.
Yes, I have to agree to that too. No, it's just our general manager is the first, he identifies as deaf, and he's the first actually general manager in Western Canada doing administrative work, and has had to do back and forth with Canada Council, and it's been a learning process and kind of bumpy, but I have to say they've stepped up to the plate. So I do really thank you for that.
sometimes I feel like you shouldn't, it's almost like you don't need to thank somebody for doing the right thing. So much as I think, okay, like thank you, and I'm going to pass on the message because they work in my team. I also run the equity office, so I think I will definitely go to, but I think it's more saying thank you for all the great work, but I think institutions, it's like you should do things like that. So I accept your thank you on behalf of from an individual human perspective, but institutionally, I think that's what is just our job.
Yeah, well, you know what I'll do is I'll actually thank Landon because what he had to do to go through, and I'm so grateful having him as an administrative assistant. He's awesome, and that he did it, which was great.
Thank God I've had time to cool down a bit, because with wine, my temper tends to be hotter. But when you spoke about the survey being in multiple languages, my first gut reaction was, hey, that's my bilingualism, that's my constitutional right that's there. And I felt compelled to stand up and say, don't touch this, because we fought for it, and we still have to fight for it. But I understand where you're coming from, and I've had time to calm down. It doesn't show. But and as I say this, I realize that even as a Francophone minority, I speak from a position of privilege. And that this gut reaction that I had is one of someone who's fighting for a right that's also a privilege, and a right and a privilege that I'm looking for the right words in English, that is not acknowledging the existence of other languages, including our indigenous languages.
So,
Because Frédéric and I, we talked about this. I just want to highlight our translators in the corner who have been translating to mostly, I don't think anyone's wearing the headsets, and that is, to me, so important, because at any moment, if I feel uncomfortable, I can go and pick up a headset. And it might be confusing to a lot of people that there's a booth in the corner of the room with people speaking all day with no one wearing the headsets, but it is such an important part of what we're doing here.
Well, I'm glad I waited for your intervention, because I was going to talk about, in our play, one of the most hilarious and informative scenes, because translation was a huge issue at the signing of these treaties, right? There were three languages spoken. There were 7 nations, the Stoney Nakoda, which has 3, and there were the Blackfoot people, the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai, and then there were the Tsuut'ina. So there they were in 1867. Most of them didn't speak English, and there was one translator who apparently must have been here because he'd had a few cocktails. So anyway, he was charged with translating at the treaty. And, as we talked about today, the true spirit and intent of the treaty never really got through. And you can imagine an oral culture facing this document that is illegible even to lawyers today, it's like one big long run-on sentence, and trying to translate that. And the scene is of a Stoney Nakoda elder and a Blackfoot elder, and then there's a young person in the middle who's pretending to translate, who doesn't understand either of what they're saying. And it's just so funny, because it's just a bunch of BS, what's shooting out of his mouth, and eventually the 2 elders just tell him where to go. But it's too bad there isn't almost, the surtitles, because apparently what they're saying is very funny too. But what happens in the audience, I can tell you, the Calgarian audience had no idea that these are languages that our First Nations people speak, different languages, languages fluently. This is like a big revelation to people. So to have that in the play it's just by doing it that way, speaks much louder than the translation and trying to say what I just said. That 2-minute or 3-minute scene is very funny and gets the point across. So to your point, yeah, rock and roll, just make sure that we hear. I wish that, I don't want to be too much of a provocateur, but over the next 150 years, if we could just become, instead of like one nation, just a country of nations.
I want to bring it back out to the big picture a little bit more. I think it's really great to sustain good work that's been happening for years and to celebrate the new models that are being introduced. As a young, unjaded optimist coming into the sector who has not been in the sector for years and years and years, I have encountered on many times a fear of disruption. And we can say enough to celebrate our successes with our boards and our funders and wanting to share good outcomes to keep our funding going. I'm kind of going all in multiple places, but just follow me. We've been talking a lot about the accountability to our creators and our communities, but on a very practical level, we need to talk about the accountability to our boards and funders when it comes to talking about disruption and getting them on board in good conversations. So my question is more about the experiences around the table on what conversations have you had, real conversations have you had about failure and experimentation and risk, and openly embracing that when we are talking to our boards and our funders about doing things differently.
Yeah, at where I work, the diversity, they want to be more diverse. And I guess the main challenge that they perceive is how to quantify the diversity and how to track it and report on it. And for me, I think that's just an excuse not to actually try anything. And so I think like if you want to see if your diversity activities are paying off, I think it's about how your audience starts to feel about the people they're surrounded with or surrounded by and the art that they're interacting with. I think that's a good way to quantify or report on it. So that's what I've been trying to get our organization to do more, is to gauge the feeling of the people who are participating in and what they're participating in.
I see a connection between what you're talking about how is there ways to fail and learn from that, making a connection to what Luke was talking about spaces and territories. And as I'm looking around this table of the people who have taken the initiative to take up space in this very white room, it's women and people of color have come to this table and taken space for ourselves. And I think that is where movement is allowed. When there's space, there's movement. Something Renata said earlier about when there's conflict, it's because I've been given space, to share my voice. And I think in conflict is where we figure that out and where we can make progress.
This is a bit of just a provocation, and that is that I am so excited to be in everyone's company. I was invited also, I'm a special guest. And we've talked about a lot of things that are so important. One thing is painfully not present here, and it's the conversation about gender to me. When I look up at the wall, I see all names of men on the wall. There are other problems there. When we talk about the post-Trump era, let's not pretend that's not about misogyny as well. And I feel, it makes me feel uneasy every day. I don't know what it means to be a woman in 2017, whether that's a risk. To me, what it means for my career long term, I just don't know. And I'd love to hear what that means in the arts, because there's so many powerful women in this room, but I still think the bulk of the power is held by 5 to 10 men in this room. And so how do we address that, and how do we move past it?
Yeah, this is the gap in the conversation that I wanted to find a way into. So my name is Ruth Smiley. I'm the Artistic Director of Globe Theatre. I've been running theatres since I was 26 years old. And for most of my career, I've been one of 1 or 2 women in Canadian theatre running a regional theatre. And that hasn't changed. And every time another woman leaves, I hope and pray that there will be another woman to step into that role. At least that. But that's not what happens. And so I do think that this marginalization of the voice of women, not only in leadership roles, but also as writers, as directors on stage, as choreographers, as leaders of creative teams, it's such a gap, and it's so inexcusable in 2017. There's so many accomplished women who have so much to offer. And what I've done at my theater is pretty much exclusively only hiring women now, to make the space for women to have the culture in which they can thrive. And I just want to say one other thing. I was a single mom, so I started running a theater when I was a single mother with an 18-month-old. And there were no daycares in those days. And the Arts Club Theatre and Carousel Theatre in Vancouver supported me in hiring a nanny to come to work with me so I could breastfeed my child. And I'm appalled that all these years later, go to the Stratford Festival, and I'm not calling out one organization, but it's an organization with so much resource, where actors work day, night, 6 days a week, and there is no childcare available for the artists at Stratford Festival. This is shocking, and it needs to change. So one last thing I would like to say is that my daughter, who was 18 months when I started running theaters, is now a mother of a child who has seizure disorder. And he had seizures for over a year. He had brain injury. He stopped walking. He stopped talking. And so I've had to also come to terms with what normal means and how our society accommodates. So my grandson is not at all accommodated at school, and one of the things he can't tolerate is noise. And for a child that's going to school in grade 1, noise is terribly disruptive for him. So we are doing relaxed performances at the theater because I finally personally understood the impact of a family having nowhere to go together. So we can go together.
Well, thanks. I just got my invitation to dinner. I'm sorry I'm late. Until you mentioned gender, I didn't feel invited. And when I also noticed that there weren't other yellow badges at the table, I didn't feel invited. And so I came to dinner because what I've been really thinking about is this word diversity, and what somebody said to me yesterday is that in their language, the word diversity doesn't exist. And we focus so much, and if you really think about that word diversity, it's about how we are different and not how we are the same. And being gender, I have spent my whole career being a leader. I come from classical music. I am currently the president at the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, but classical music is one of those areas where gender has been a big conversation, and we struggle. But what I wanted to ask is it's what I wonder, even in the Culture Next, is by being different than institutions and creating spaces for different models and artists and community engagement. Let us not demonize each other. Let's not say institutions are bad. Let's not. I'm really looking for an ecosystem. And as a woman who has led an organization just recently here in Canada, but with a lot of other organizations in the United States, it's been a lonely journey. And I have not felt welcome in this leadership model based on my generation. And I look to the generations that are younger than me and the boards that are being created and saying, how do we make space so people feel that they belong and that they are not on the outside looking in?